Hi everyone, so in this video I'm going to talk about how to choose the right type of yarn and the right type of needles to start your knitting project. So if you walk into a craft store like Michael's or AC Moore or anything like that, you're going to see a bunch of different types of needles and a bunch of different types of yarn. So where do you start with that? There's a lot of different types of yarn. There's like curly yarn, different colors. Some have like a shiny sheen to it. Some are like matte or like cotton. There's organic yarn. They have different lengths, different widths of yarn, and there's like chunky yarn. So basically what you do is for beginners, I would start out with like a simple, like no curly yarn or anything, just simple yarn. I would probably recommend a thicker yarn because the thicker the yarn, the faster you will complete your project, because you don't have to make as many stitches to make a large piece. So that's what I would recommend. I find it easier to knit with thicker yarn. So once you've chosen the type of yarn that you like, on the labels they actually tell you what type of needle you should use. Now, knitting needles have different sizes. They have what you call a US size. So US sizes are different than millimeter sizes. The sizes go by either a US size or they go by how many millimeters it is. So on your yarn, you want to look for something that looks like this. They'll have like a diagram that looks like this. And on here there's going to be a symbol for knitting needles, and then they're on top and on the bottom they're going to tell you what size knitting needles are better for this type of yarn. So you don't always have to follow it, but if you're starting out, it's a good idea to go by what they recommend on here. So for example, for this yarn, they are recommending needles that are US size 13, which is also the same as 9mm needles. And I do have a pair of those right here. And usually on the box that the needles come in, they'll have the size of the needles written right on there. So you can match the numbers to the number that they recommend on the yarn that you chose. But right here on top it has, I don't know if you could see it, but it's US size 13 needles. So the thicker the yarn, the larger the needles that you would need to use. So these would be the needles that I would use to knit using this yarn. If you're using yarn that is not as thick, they call the thickness weight, so this would be like a lighter weight yarn. It's thinner than the one I showed before. This one calls for US size 9, which is 5.5mm needles. And it has a diagram right here. So US size 9 needles would be these. It's backwards, I'm sorry. But US size 9, which is 5.5mm. So this is these are the needles that I would have to use for this type of yarn. So knitting needles can range from something so thin like this to something massively huge like this needle. This is like a gigantic needle. It's size 17. I have never even used this before, but I do own it. You'll also have straight needles, which are used for making scarves, and you might also see needles that look like they're connected. These are circular needles, and oh my goodness, I almost poked my eye out. And these are circular needles which are used for making hats or circle scarves or cowls or neck warmers. So you'll also see these in the store. These are, I would say these, you probably don't want to start knitting with circular needles. You want to start knitting, start learning using straight needles first, because in my opinion, it's a lot easier. Hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions for me, you can leave a comment below or you can tweet me and I will try to help you out. But basically the bottom line is the thicker your yarn, the larger needles that you'll need to use. If you use a thin yarn or a lightweight yarn with a large needle, you're going to end up with really loose work. So your knits aren't going to be tight. And if you use a thick yarn with very small needles, it's going to end up being too tight and your work will kind of be stiff. So you always want to look at the yarn and see what number they recommend, and once you get more used to, I guess, once you're more experienced, you can mix and match, and depending on how you want your work to end up, you'll be able to choose the right type of yarn with the right type of needle. Alright guys, I will see you guys next time, and hopefully this video was helpful to you.